All right, friends. So here we are as Donald Trump continues to raise alarms about our economy because he once again inherited an economy that was, quote, the envy of the world, dear friends. And then within 100 days, he has put us through a meat grinder. And to make matters worse, aside from, pulling up childhood bullshit and calling the Federal Reserve chairman, Jerome Powell, a quote unquote loser, because that's what bullies do. Jerome Powell has said he ain't stepping down. And as a matter of fact, Wall Street doesn't want him to step down. And he continues to ring every alarm bell, according to the New Republic and their latest article. Federal Reserve rings every alarm bell about Trump's economy because what Jerome Powell and, oh, I don't know, every other fucking economist has said is, quote, this: if the large increases in tariffs that have been announced are sustained, they're likely to generate a rise in inflation, a slowdown in economic growth, and an increase in unemployment. This is what he said on Wednesday. He goes on to say this: the effects of inflation could be short lived, reflecting a one time shift in the price level. It is also possible that the inflationary effects could instead be more persistent. Avoiding that outcome will depend on the size of the tariff effects, on how long it takes for them to pass through fully into prices, and ultimately on keeping longer term inflation expectations well anchored. And what do we know, Andy, about Donald Trump and the fact that the man has no real plan, has no real strategy? This is not four-dimensional chess. This is basically, I don't know, Pinky and the Brain, and I'm not sure which one of his cabinet members. I don't know if it's Ron Navarro, aka Peter Navarro, who is his economic advisor, that is the brain behind his economic shifts that have sent the world into turmoil. But do you think there's a strategy here? Because I don't see one.
Look, his strategy, if you want to call it that, is that he, despite what anyone and everyone tells him, he thinks tariffs are a good idea. And he's obsessed with trade deficits, and he thinks that trade deficits are inherently bad, which they're not. It's obviously good that Jerome Powell is saying this. Ultimately, it doesn't matter because Trump doesn't care. Anyone pretty much who's not a part of the Trump administration knows that tariffs will do exactly what Jerome Powell is saying they'll do. What they will probably lead to is what's called stagflation. It doesn't work. And there's a reason why we have looked at things in the past, like the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, as a bad thing for the country. And the only strategy that he has is to keep doing what he is doing because he's obsessed with tariffs. There's no economic backbone to it. Again, what Jerome Powell is saying has been said a million times. Danielle, you and I have said that, and we
Mm-hmm.
don't know jack shit about economics because you
Mm-mm.
don't have to. It is just very obvious that if you start putting these absurdly high tariffs on goods coming into this country, that prices will go up, and that no, it's not going to magically lead to some sort of manufacturing boom in America. It's just going to lead to higher prices, and it's going to lead to consumers having less purchasing power. And so it's wild that we have to sit here, and I don't mean this as a dig at Jerome Powell. Again, I'm glad he's saying this, but it's wild that, you know, we're at the point where the chairman of the Fed has to say these things that I think are clear to a freshman economics student in college, or even people like us who don't know
Are
anything
you
about
saying that
economics.
we're not as knowledgeable as a freshman? It's true. I had to take
Yeah,
economics
that is
twice.
what I'm saying.
But
Yes.
but here's the thing too, is that Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary was on Capitol Hill this week as well, sitting before the Financial Committee. And when he was asked, he was being questioned by Representative Gregory Meeks. And Meeks was like, "So you want to sit here and tell us that trade deficits, right, are a national security threat?" And Besant says, "Yes, that's exactly right." And he goes, "Okay." He goes, "Do you know that we have had a trade deficit issue for the last 40 years? So you're telling me." He's
Right.
like, and that's under multiple administrations, both Republican and Democrats, that have not seen trade deficits as a national security threat. So what you're telling me right now is that you all are out here playing politics, because this has has nothing to do with the other. So for 40 years, this has been happening, right? And you all want to, again, what I continue to say, manufacture a crisis that does not
Mhm.
actually exist. Because again, I think it's important that Jerome Powell is saying the things that he is, because Donald Trump is going to try and hang the fact that American shelves are going to be empty, right? And that we are entering a place of stagflation. He's going to try and hang that on the fact that he won't lower interest rates, right? That he's going to try and hang this, the failing economy, on
Right.
Powell. And
Right.
Powell is saying from the outset, like, "No, I am telling you what potentially could happen if you continue with this trade war, with these nonsensical tariffs, because you don't have an actual plan here. You keep talking about bringing back manufacturing to the United States, but you're not talking about the timeline in which it's going to take to build those factories, skill those workers, right? And be able to scale up in a way that there isn't going to be a gap between our ability to purchase what it is that we need, and these magical factories returning to America." Right? Like, and so I think that for me, it's important that these conversations keep happening, because Donald Trump is trying to lay the seeds of his next big lie, which is this failed economy has everything to do with either Biden, which he has
Right.
started to say,
Yep.
that, oh, it's going to be Biden's economy for the next two fucking quarters, right? And that it has nothing to do. I just got here, is what he told Kristen Welker on NBC. "I just
Yeah.
got here. So I don't, they talking about egg prices. And I was still unpacking boxes at the White House. I don't know what you're talking about."
Danielle, you are absolutely right. It is absolutely of a piece with him blaming Biden for everything. And I fully agree that he is sowing the seeds to blame Jerome Powell for this. And Jerome Powell is basically saying, you know what? The Fed is an independent board, and we're going to stay independent. And I'm not going to do what you want me to do if I think it's bad. And it's interesting that uh, right around the same time, we had Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, delivering a speech up in Buffalo, New York, talking about the importance of an independent judiciary. And I'll just quote a little of what he said from an NBC News report. He said, "In our Constitution, the judiciary is a co-equal branch of government with the authority to interpret the Constitution as law and strike down acts of Congress or acts of the president. And that innovation doesn't work if the judiciary is not independent. Its job is to decide cases, but in the course of that, check the excesses of Congress or the executive, and that does require a degree of independence." It's nice to hear John Roberts say that. I wish he'd act more like he believed it. Um, but it is interesting that a Supreme Court that has basically, whether Trump's been in office or not, has basically bowed
Mhm.
to the MAGA movement, to the Federalist Society, to conservatives. It's nice to hear the Chief Justice, piping up and reminding people that that the judiciary is supposed to be independent. Again, it would have been nice if he did this before, helping to rule that anything the president does while in
Was
office as part of his official duties is legal, and things like that. That would have been checking the excesses of the executive that he's now so worried about. It's interesting in that it seems like maybe Trump. The rhetoric from the Trump administration is too much, even for the justices who are sympathetic to Trump.
Justice John Roberts should take a fucking seat, Because when you had an opportunity back in July of 2024 to say very distinctly in a ruling that American presidents do not have the power of a king, y'all MAGA members of the Supreme Court decided, no, no, he absolutely does, knowing exactly who was running for president at the time. So this was not a hypothetical. In their ruling, should have taken into consideration, my God, if a figure like Donald Trump becomes president again and we give him absolute immunity, and this is a man that at that time was appearing in multiple courtrooms around the country for his grifting, for his stealing of classified documents, for the insurrection, so on and so forth, and you still ruled that a president could have absolute and total immunity, which means that anyone in their clique, in their inner circle, also could be part of the pardon parade. And now John Roberts wants to sit down and talk about it. Sir, shut the fuck up. Like, in all honesty, do what you've been doing, which is nothing. Aside from the fuckery that is the Supreme Court, there is actually a bit of good news. And I know, folks, it is a struggle, for us to find good news. And we try on a regular basis. Andy and I and Seamus, we try to bring it to you. And so there is good news out of North Carolina. Over the last several months, there has been a battle as to whether or not the voters in North Carolina, their votes matter, right? The Republican challenger for North Carolina Supreme Court finally conceded last November's election on Wednesday to Democratic incumbent Allison Riggs, 2 days after a federal judge ruled that potentially thousands of disputed ballots challenged by Jefferson Griffin must remain in the final tally. Essentially, what the Republicans were trying to do here is say that those that had mail-in ballots, right? And this is again, this is the par for the course with Republicans, that mail-in ballots, thousands of mail-in ballots, should not count in the voting. Which would have allowed this Democrat to be seated and the people's voice to be heard. And so a federal judge, the Trump appointee, said uh, that they respect the court's holding, that they're not going to move forward with dispensing of thousands of votes. And so the people of North Carolina that kept their foot on the pedal here in terms of ensuring that their voices would be heard, will now have a Democratic seat in the North Carolina Supreme Court. This matters greatly as we know that so many things are being kicked to the courts, and this is exactly why the Republicans were trying to silence the voters there, and it did not work. And it is even better that it was a Trump appointee who has decided to, oh, I don't know, uphold the rule of law, which is, the bar is in hell now. So we applaud them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just finish by saying, it's important to note that this was literally Republicans trying to steal an election. This was an election that was won by the Democrat, and even the former Republican governor of North Carolina, Pat McCrory, said he said this is not just a recount or a challenge. He said, quote, "This had to do with basically changing the rules after the election is over." And that's exactly what they were trying to do. And they got pretty far with it to the point that it had to go to federal courts. Uh, but at least the good news is that it was eventually stopped. But this is the blueprint, folks. So yeah, this is very good news. Don't get me wrong. And thank you, Danielle, for bringing a bit of good news to the show. But it's definitely something that is going to be a blueprint for trying to do more of this in the future with other elections.